Hi, I welcome you to Wayne Community College and this special presentation from a couple of our faculty members who went to the Ukrainian border to assist refugees. Today we're going to hear from Adam Combs, who is a clinical nursing instructor and our simulation coordinator, which is just the coolest thing. And he is, of course, a registered nurse. He couldn't be in that position without being that. He's also a doctor of nursing practice from Gardner-Webb recently, just in July 2021. And we've recently learned that he is going to be in the National League of Nursing's Leadership Development Program for Simulation Educators. So thank you, Adam. And Marielle Combs, also a nursing instructor, also received her doctorate in nursing practice from Gardner-Webb University at the same time. Imagine that. And they were doing this during the pandemic, in addition to doing things in nursing for people who were hit by COVID. So these are truly amazing people. And I understand that Marielle will be receiving the Betty Garrison Award from Gardner-Webb for Outstanding Nursing Student. What got them to this point beyond a personal interest in trafficking was Marielle's doctoral research on human trafficking, empowering healthcare providers and community partners as advocates for victims. And she has made several presentations on this. And they were involved with EXITUS, which is a nonprofit that deals with international trafficking. And so it all came together with the crisis in Ukraine. So today they're going to tell you about their experiences there, and then we will have also a special guest, Jason Lloyd, who is a project manager for EXITUS, who can tell us a little more in depth about maybe the organization and what he saw after the Combses had to leave. So I'm going to turn it over to
Thank you for having us. We are really excited to be here today and get to share with you about our experiences that we had at the border of Ukraine, both in Romania and in Moldova. As Sarah said, we got into anti-trafficking work only in December of this year, or last year rather, and it has continued on. We volunteer. I'm the director of resources for EXITUS. Marielle is the director of nursing education for EXITUS. So one of the things that we have seen is that there's a huge need of education on anti-trafficking. So that's one of the opportunities that EXITUS has, is going in and educating individuals on what trafficking is and what you as an individual can do to help us put a stop to trafficking. We come in to fill gaps. So we love to collaborate with community partners on what is in the community so that that community can sustain themselves long term. EXITUS comes from the Latin term EXITUS, a passage by which one may depart, so the way out, the conclusion. So we do an extensive process with our victims as they're transitioning to survivors to help them become successful individuals long term.
So we have planned to give you this story in pictures. So we want to take you with us and what we saw. And the best place to start with Ruslan. So EXITUS accommodates to many needs around the world. And one of those is helping trafficked orphans. There are American parents who adopt orphan children from Ukraine. Some orphanages are fine, but some orphanages are not. They actually traffic the children. They get money from the government and pocket it, and they will actually keep the children very sedated to the point of heavy, heavy addiction. If a child is sedated, they do not need attention, they don't need care, and they don't need food. So what some of these adoptive parents are finding when they get the children, they are severely malnourished. So this is Ruslan. He was the last child that EXITUS helped from a regular adoption before the war started. The reason EXITUS is involved, in addition to being anti-trafficking, is that we provide a nurse who will travel with the parents to Ukraine to finalize the adoption and then bring the child back. The reason for that is many times they are so malnourished and so dehydrated that they may not even make it across from Ukraine to the U.S. So the nurse is there to keep them alive, get them to the U.S., and get them in the hospital. This little guy had a severe infection, was dehydrated and malnourished, and he went straight into the ICU when he arrived here in the U.S. They got the last flight out of Ukraine, period, before the war started. So he's an example of what we do. This is a child that we assisted as well before Ruslan. He's 9 years old and weighs 20 pounds. Some of these children are disabled and some are not. They have become disabled because of severe malnourishment. So I hate to put something so graphic, but it's just easier to tell with pictures, the severity of things. So we got the call to assist, because we were nurses, to help with these children. Once the war hit, there were about 21 parents who were in the process of finalizing an adoption. And our hope was to intervene and get these children out of those orphanages before the war got too bad and get them to the U.S. For example, one was 4 minutes away. They were in the Zoom call with the court. And the sirens went off, and the Zoom call ended, and that's where their adoption process ended, and they were getting ready to sign papers and finalize everything. That's how close some of these parents are to finalizing these adoptions. And as we were waiting to depart, we were trying to get all the paperwork ready. We found out that one of the team members, Serge, was murdered by Russians. As you see on the slide, he helped over 3,500 special needs children find homes. He is one of those team members that was American and Ukrainian, and he would be on the ground to retrieve children from orphanages, legally, of course, with the assistance that we provided. So that was extremely heartbreaking to have someone from our team pass like that. Made it a lot more personal and honestly a little bit more scary. But then it gives you the umph to even do it more, certainly. And I'll let Adam tell you about once we arrived to the border with Romania.
So we had the initial call February the 22nd, and it was a back and forth process. Of course, the war is continuing to rage on, and our team is back in the States working with our team that's on the ground in Ukraine, trying to figure out exactly the best time and the best place and the best spot, get all the paperwork together so that we can make this as quick of a turnaround for these kids as we are. So we left Raleigh and through a couple of flights ended up in Bucharest, Romania. And we drove up to the border of Siret, or in Siret, Romania, was the border of Romania and Ukraine. When we got there, very organized border crossing. As you can see here, there's tents, and the street was just lined with tents. It almost looked like a carnival. Hundreds of tents lined, food, shelter, clothing, warm meals, just a place to get out of the elements. Because let's not forget, you can see how bundled the individuals are. We're in the dead of winter there. So it was -3 to -degrees Celsius, wind chill like 0. It was just blistering cold. And so we walked around and we found that this area was well established. And so, again, our team is there to fill gaps. And so we found out about a church in a village called Suceava that was housing refugees. And you can see the beds are laying next to each other, barely enough room to move through. This church housed 90 refugees the night before we got there. This young lady here is Romanian. She is fluent in English and Romanian. And her dad would bring her to the center, 15 years old. Her dad would bring her to the church every morning, and she would stay and play with the kids and be a translator for us even, and others that would come in. So there was one time that some of our team members were speaking to her in English, and she would translate it to Romanian to speak to a refugee who spoke Ukrainian and Romanian, to translate it to another refugee who spoke only Ukrainian. So it was really excellent to see the collaboration there. But she would come just to play with the kids. They were throwing ball, playing Uno, etc. So myself and one of the paramedics that went with our team, obviously medical background, so medical needs is what we were assessing, looking for. We found there was a need for medications. They've lost access to their finances. Some of them only had the medications that they had with them, and so they've run out at this point. Some of these individuals have walked 6 miles just to get to the border. So there was a diabetic patient that had gotten foot wounds. So Chris and I walked around and just kind of got a list together of what medications we needed for the refugees that were waiting in this church. And off we went to the pharmacy. The medications in the European, in Moldova, Romania, are not regulated like they are in the U.S. So we walked into the pharmacy and we began talking to the pharmacist. We need antihypertensives, we need something for diabetic foot care, we need prenatal vitamins, etc. And everything we needed she gave us, she put on the counter. When we finished, we filled up a Walmart bag, and it was 39 American dollars. So we got back in the van and went back to the church, and we passed out the medications to those that needed it. So that was just a small part of what we played there in Suceava. And then we've got a call from Moldova. Our contact in Moldova, we were in Polanka, Moldova, which is just outside of Odessa, Ukraine. And we've heard a lot about Odessa in the news in the beginning and now again. This is an unofficial border crossing. So the Suret border crossing was an official border crossing, had all the resources they need. Again, carnival style, hundreds of tents. We come to Moldova, and there's 3 tents for refugees. One of them refugees can't even go into, which is the small blue tent that you see in this picture here on the right. That tent had supplies only. And so our team found there was a need there, that the supplies had just kind of been thrown in there. People were bringing things or sending things and just throwing them in. Tons of medications that had been donated, but there was no medical personnel at this site. So our team, being of medical background, went in there, separated the medicines out. These medications are for cold symptoms. These medications are for this. If an individual has this complaint, then this is where you need to pull from. Clothes, shoes, food, everything, but no organization. So we were able to organize this tent so when they come in, they know what they have, they can get what they need, and then give it to the next, or to the individual. So there on the left is a picture of myself and Jason and Chris and Marielle peeking behind the shoulders there, organizing. You see toilet paper, just all kinds of things that we're organizing there. Then on the picture on the right here, 2 refugees waiting in the one tent that was set up to keep them out of the elements. The other tent had some food, but it was kind of a walk-through line and, grab a little something quickly and then move over to this other tent. And as you can see, 1 bag. One of those bags is for each of those people, and that's all they've come across the border with. These, I would say, are rare, as many of them just had carry-on luggage. So a small piece of luggage that they had put everything in, mothers and children. We didn't have many men crossing because the border with Ukraine, the men 18 to 60 are having to stay in the country and fight. So mothers and children, animals, obviously people that have animals, they don't want to leave their animals behind. They're going to bring them with them. So it was really interesting. Many of them would get off of the buses and not even know where they were at or where they were going. They're just trying to get out of the country to be safe. This is the food tent on the right, so you can see how it was kind of set up, cafeteria style, if you will. And then this is the other end of the tent I showed a minute ago where the refugees were waiting and kids just playing. Lots of toys and just an area to stay warm. really, again, it was just freezing cold. They had the parkas that they needed. They had gloves. They had scarves. Most of them did. On the other side, in Ukraine, this is a picture of the tent in Ukraine at the Polanka border crossing, but it's on the Ukrainian side. So you'll see in this picture that there's lots of men, lots of children. This is the tent where the fathers would bring their families, stay with them until they get on the bus. He puts his wife and his children on the bus, and he turns around and goes back in the country. So this is the last place that the family got to be together before they were separated. Again, mothers and children coming to us, husbands going back.
So once we finished with the assistance in the at that border crossing, the contact from Moldova wanted to talk to our team, because one of the things that EXITUS does is to help organize the chaos, helps places extend their resources, and they're one of the poorest countries surrounding Ukraine. So they're poor. They're doing all they can with these thousands and thousands of people, but they are also worried about themselves and their own resources for their own people. So we had a meeting at a place run by a church. We met with a couple of local people. There was a pastor from Alabama who actually had a relationship. You know how churches here build relationships with churches in Europe? That was the case, and he was over there helping that church that they committed to. And we basically tried to hear their needs. They voiced, we have needs here. This is what we have to offer. How can we use it for the best? So our CEO, Candace, and we'll show you a picture of her later, she presented some options, and she suggested that one of the best things we could do was continue to assess the resources within the community. So from there, we were called to do a clinic assessment for the one clinic that provides medical care in Moldova. And then the other half of the team went to meet with the mayor in another area to see more of the logistics for the city. I do want to point out the ladies on the left, they were cooking meals for us, but they were also cooking meals to take to the border for the people in those tents. And there was maybe like 5 or 6 of them working. So when you see the spirit of the assistance that these neighbors are providing for the Ukrainian people, it is very inspiring, because it's like the ladies in the church, just like us, that we think, you know, what we do is not much, but in that case, a warm meal to those people who have nothing and are in the freezing cold, and just knowing that their children would have a meal, because they don't know how their kids are going to eat from that point on, was really amazing. So that was very inspiring to me. So Adam and I and a couple of the other nurses that went with us set off to go to this clinic. It was a 2-story building, and the rooms were in a very narrow hall, and every room seemed to have a specialty. So it would be a cardiology room, an obstetrics room, the kidney specialist would be in another room. And one of the main needs that we heard was that they only have 1 provider full-time all week. They need over 10. So that tells you the shortage right there. This is on a regular day, no non-war. What they do is a larger organization will send their medical doctors every other Saturday, and then they will see patients for half the day. We went on a Saturday. And on the picture on the right, you'll see Jason close to the board, sitting there, our friend Jason, in that meeting with the rest of the team. But they're short providers. The equipment is extremely outdated. The picture on the left is an ultrasound machine from 1984, and that's the only ultrasound machine they have working. They have another ultrasound machine that made it in bad condition. It was used, and when it got there, it didn't work, and they don't have the money to buy any more. That's an echocardiogram machine on the right. It's supposed to look at the heart. The specialist from the clinic, the bigger institution that comes every other Saturday, he had to bring that himself. So it's a portable one because this particular clinic doesn't have it. And they were also using that to find fetal heart tones. So for pregnant women to get a heartbeat on the child, they were using the echocardiogram machine, which is not supposed to be used for that. They could not do certain lab studies because of their lack of resources, and they felt the impact. So as of this week, I saw on the news, over 500,000 refugees had crossed over Moldova. So you can imagine the strain. This was weeks ago now. So they were so desperate to help, but to be guided and receive some assistance as well. And that day, the day that we finished a clinic assessment, we were told that now Adam and I need to write a report. This report would be a needs assessment report, and it would be turned into possible people who would give grants or funding to help this clinic sustain itself. I want to add that we also were given a tour of the upstairs, and the upstairs, they had refugees there. So this clinic was housing refugees as well. It's like wherever you can put them, they will house them. It was one family per room. We met a family that was the grandmother, her daughter, and her 2 grandchildren, and the dog, all in one room. I could see the strain in their eyes, the stress of, because they only stay there about 10 days. And then from there, they have to decide where they want to go. And some are being sent to Poland, Germany, Italy, and different places, and they're staying with families that they don't know. So another thing we found as we speak about refugees is the people of Moldova and probably Romania as well, they're putting their maybe extra rooms from their homes on the list, on the government list. And as they're getting refugees in, they look on that list and they place them into those rooms or houses. So our waiter in Romania, the poor guy, he is housing a family and he's giving that lady half of his salary. He doesn't have it to give, but they have nothing. So when you put it in perspective like that, it's pretty impactful, and I'll just reiterate how amazing their resilience is and how giving they are. So now I'll turn it over to Jason. Jason, you can come up. Like it was said, he's our project manager. This mission is not over, and he will tell you a little bit about what happened after we left, because the day after the assessment, we put a time for 4 p.m. that if we did not have the children we came after, we had to leave. And the reason we didn't have the children we came after was for several reasons. 1 or 2, the orphanage was bombed, so we could not prove that there was life there. Some others, they were moved to other places in Ukraine or to another country for safety. And then some others, the orphan directors would not release them. So we showed up with all the appropriate paperwork. We, not me, my mom is in the audience, I never went to Ukraine. They just put it out there. But there's a ground team that would actually be in the war zone getting these kids, and when they would show up with all the legal paperwork, the orphan directors refused. Barricaded the door, hid, absolutely would not release the children. So that's why we came home, unfortunately, with no kids. But Jason can tell you what happened after.
Yeah, and to give you some context on how generous these people are, in Romania, one of our drivers told us that an executive makes about $1,500 a month. That's a good salary in Romania. So these people, Moldova is even more poor of a country than Romania. And opening up their homes and doing what they could, they were doing everything they could to help these people in Ukraine find a place to go, but it was all short term. And because they were using all of their resources with 1,000 people crossing that border every day, they were about to close the border because they didn't have any more homes. They didn't have any more people that could help them out. then you look at the contrast of the border with Siret, where they originally came, versus what you see down in Palanca, and there's just not a lot there. That's where things really kind of shined. And we had the opportunity to kind of take a tactical pause. So I'll show you, first we had, with our medical teams heading home and not having to coordinate so much of that, but also over here, let me skip one more. Our tactical teams that were in Ukraine, as they were transporting a couple of special needs orphans who needed some help to a hospital, our ambulance broke down. And so we were able to get an ambulance from the hospital to meet us there to transport the kids over, but then we had to put our tactical team on pause while we got a new ambulance and got the old ambulance fixed. So it gave us a little bit of a lull in action, and that allowed us the time that we needed to kind of put some resources together for Moldova. So if we go back a few slides to this meeting right here, you'll notice these people they're from Spain. They had 500,000 pounds of food they wanted to bring into the area. The problem is they couldn't justify it. So the government in Stefan Voda's, where this was, they hadn't organized anything. They weren't sure what to do. This was all grassroots movement from the churches, from the people, from everybody trying to get involved and actually going to the government and saying, help us, how do we get involved, what do we do? And so you have this local organizer, he was a rock star, and he saw us coming in, and he saw these people coming in, and he scheduled this meeting to sit around the table and try to figure out what can we do? How do we help organize this border? And he was worried that there'd be a little conflict there, that our organization might be competing with this organization and who gets the credit or who what, right? So as we sit down at the table and say, how do you want to help? What are we trying to do? And what are we trying to establish? The people at this table say, we've got 500,000 pounds of food, but in order to bring it, we need a needs assessment. We need to know how much food you guys are using. How much do you need so that we can take this back to the CEOs or to these organizations and justify the need and get the relief to you? And the local organizer, he didn't know how to do a needs assessment. He didn't know what a needs assessment was, and that's where EXITUS came in. That's where Candace came in and says, this is what we do. We can put the needs assessment together for you and unlock all of these global organizations that want to help to bring them in and plug them into you. So then he realized we weren't there to compete. We were there to collaborate. We were there to make this work. So that's when Candace started tapping some of our people back here, some of our medics, some of the, sending them out and getting these assessments put together and finding out how many meals are we burning through, how much do we need, what can we do? And now all of a sudden the border on Palanca looks very different. It looks a lot more like the border that you see up in Siret. And the timing of everything, just amazing. Because now you see that Russia has pulled out of the northern part of Ukraine, where we have all of that traffic that was going into Poland, all the traffic that was going into northern Romania, and they've refocused their efforts to the southeast portion, which is next to Moldova. So we had kind of a quiet lull in the action, just enough time to kind of gather things together, this tactical pause, to coordinate with the local resources, to get those needs assessments together, and to prepare them for the storm that's to come, so that their border's just as strong as some of these other borders that needed the help. That's kind of how things wrapped up towards the end. Just see if there's any. This is the team itself. Did you want to introduce it, or?
Yeah. So on the top right, the big picture is Candace Rivera. She's our CEO. She's our rock star for sure. On the top left is Chris in the middle with Adam and I. Excuse our clothes, but we only pack one book bag, and they said pack 2 clothes worth for the whole week. You will reuse the clothes. You will not shower, and that was the truth. Dry shampoo was my friend, and a ball cap, and that's Chris there. At the top middle is Dr. Remington. He is a surgeon here in Goldsboro, and he is part of EXITUS. He's the one that recruited us. On the bottom left is Danny, his wife. She's the director of nursing, and he's the medical director for EXITUS. And then in the middle is Jason and I, because we didn't know Jason was going to be here until like Wednesday. So we're blessed to have him from Utah to speak to everyone. I do want to add, before I hand it over to Adam, that I know we have students in here. So we went for our doctorate, and we took classes, and some of those classes talked about needs assessments. And it felt like those things that we would never use again. You know, those check marks, I'll just do this. We have everything we need in the U.S. You know, everything's already so established. I'm never going to use this. And when we went to Romania, the plan was not to go to Moldova. That came on out of the blue completely. And all of a sudden, the CEO looks at us and goes, you guys are going to go do a needs assessment. And our doctoral degree really came to life. I'm glad I had the classes. I'm so glad they prepared us. So all of those useless things you think will never mean and you will never use, honestly, pay attention. They are really tools in your toolbox that you could make a huge difference with one day when you least expect it and you're actually trusted with something big like what we were trusted with. You know.
And so I'll add to that to say, not only do we now have doctorate students in our fields, Dr. Combs and myself both graduated from here. We both got our start at Wayne Community. Dr. Pfeiffer taught both of us. You can do great things. This is just the beginning for you. If you have questions, feel free, super easy, Adam or Marielle at joinexodus.org. And that is our email address. Feel free to email us. But how can you help? And we had this conversation. We've had some phenomenal conversations this weekend with Jason being here. Jason's headed back to Moldova on Sunday because our efforts are ongoing. We are there. We've created a children's home in Moldova. We have partnered with the community. Again, partnerships and collaborations are what we focus on. So speaking about bringing the food in, we don't want to bring all that food in to this community because then it's going to also hurt the economy of that community. So how can we partner with some of that food coming in, but then also getting it from the local resources? But each of us, we had this conversation. We have been looked at as heroes because we have gone to the border of Ukraine. We're not the heroes. We look at this, the parents that are adopting these children with special needs, they're the heroes to a degree. But again, they're not the hero fully. Each one of us has an opportunity in some way to be a hero for the people of Ukraine, for the people of Moldova. Exodus is an organization that I promise you, every dollar that you give that's going to go to Ukraine will go to Ukraine. As Jason said, one of our ambulances broke down. Our team, in collaboration with Mission 823 and some others in the Ukraine Children's Collaborative, were able to come together and meet the needs of the people. 9 of every $10 goes to the mission of what we are there for. So it's joinexodus.org. If you're QR savvy, this QR code will take you to our website. But there's an opportunity there for you to donate. The biggest need is financial because, as they said, the machines from 1984 that's used in the medical clinic, we could get one here and send over. We had 4 boxes of medical supplies that left Raleigh to Atlanta to Amsterdam to Bucharest. When we got in Bucharest, we had 1. So obviously things get lost in shipping. So our team is there in Romania, Moldova, 22 cents to the dollar. So a small impact can make a big difference for them. So we appreciate your time. Thank you to Wayne Community for having us. Thank you for being here to hear from us. We will open up the floor now for any questions. I know we're online as well, so you can type your questions in, and we will do our best to answer any questions that you have.
I have a question. So you said that they went to your team went to the orphanage, but they had barricaded and you had all the paperwork and but they wouldn't let the children leave. Why is that?
So, and to speak to that, we did not go into Ukraine. We stayed at the border. We have, yes, I think my family is watching online as well. So we did not step foot in the Ukraine. We have special ops and tactical teams that can do that. But remember, we said this is trafficking orphanages, some of them. if they give the child away, that's a loss of money for them. So they don't want to do that. Some of these kids were not through the adoption process, so they don't have all that money from the adoptive family to use. So it really, a lot of it boils down to money. But then our team also has to be very careful of how aggressive are we, because Russians are 1 and 2 streets over. And so if we make too much noise, then we have that. Do you have anything that you can add to that, Jason?
Yeah, and I wonder if some of it isn't also nationalistic pride. That same spirit that Ukraine is fighting against Russia, saying this is ours and you're not taking it. Maybe some orphanage directors look at it as, if I surrender these kids or admit we have to move, maybe it's admitting defeat, or maybe we don't want to do it. We've also had reports of Russia trafficking about 60,000 kids out of there. So we've had Russians going in and trying to grab kids, and the directors trying to be very accountable for how many kids they have and not give it up. So some of the reasons could be a little bit altruistic, but honestly, it's one of the most puzzling things that we've had. We went back for a second phase, and in this time we had Child Protective Services in Ukraine issue an order for an orphanage down in Zaporizhia to evacuate. They asked for one of the foundations there to help evacuate them, and they got a special train. So the trains aren't running in Ukraine, but the government got a special train to get them from Zaporizhia to Lviv, to where it would be much safer for them. And then our job was just to come in with a bus, load the kids up on the bus, move them to the train station, and then take the train back up to Lviv. Well, we showed up, and the orphanage director wasn't opening the door. They weren't talking to us. We called Parliament and said, what's the deal? And they said, well, yes, there was an evacuation order. We did have a train scheduled for today, but because the orphanage director told us they were fine and they didn't want help, there's nothing we can do, and we've postponed it until we can try to convince them otherwise. So you have these very stubborn directors that just, for whatever reason, are wanting to hold on, and with war, it's just making it infinitely harder to get them out. We're able to get unaccompanied kids come across the border. We're able to house them and build an orphanage on the other side of the border, provide for their needs, sponsor them. Senior citizens or other vulnerable populations we're able to help, but these orphanages have been something extremely difficult for us to try to work through. Does that answer your question?
Definitely.
So Jason, have you been in Ukraine?
A little bit.
I'm not telling you why.
I mean, it was bad enough. I told you our CEO is a rock star. She went to the orphanage and talked to the orphanage director. That's how much she wants these kids. She went herself, and she's a mom as well. So, of course, no luck there, but yeah.
And with that, we have built, as I said, we've been in Ukraine about 7 years now. Over that time, our team has helped bring about 16 to 20 orphans out of trafficking into the States to adoptive families. So we have some relationships with them, but as Jay said, I think it's just a different time, obviously, with the war going on, et cetera. Oh, Riley, did you have a question?
Yeah, we're talking about, and it seems like most of the stuff is being done outside of the country, but what does EXITUS do? What are some of the domestic things or some ways that people can help? Are there ways that people can help without traveling?
Yes, so we do international and we also do domestic. And one of the things that we are working on right now is beginning a EXITUS community, if you will, here in Goldsboro. Again, Dr. Remington, a general surgeon in town, his wife, Danny, Marielle, and myself, we are looking at what the gaps are in Wayne County. What are the needs of Wayne County to help us not be a trafficking community? We meet all the risk factors. We have a high rate of trafficking individuals in Wayne County. So what does that look like for Wayne County? How can we bring together resources? So we're collaborating with Renita, Alan Dawson, and working on with the Reentry Council and what resources do we have? How can you plug in mentors, safe housing, lots of opportunities to get plugged in. The work is much and the laborers are few. So yes, however you feel like you could be needing, or even if you don't know, and you're just like, this is something I want to get plugged into, reach out to us, because we can find somewhere for you to plug in with us. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add what it looks like in Utah, because we're new here. If a victim of trafficking chooses to exit, then they hopefully have built a relationship, and what we try to do is build relationships with people, because to state, I am in trouble, I want out, takes trust, because they're in a very dangerous situation. So we put ourselves in the community in ways that we can build trust with people and hopefully reach them that way so that they will say, I need out. And then once they do, we try to link them with safe housing. And it may not be that we have the safe house. It may be that we partner with someone in the community who has the safe house. We also partner with someone who may provide trauma care, rehabilitation, detox, because many are on drugs. It may be that we need mentors. And that's how a lot of the community can be mentors to these people once they're out. They need a lot of help, at least 1 to 2 years worth, at least. Lots of follow-up and lots of support, because if they find themselves with no job, because a lot of them have a criminal record because they were forced to sell drugs or were forced into prostitution, then they cannot get employment. And if they can't get employment, what are they gonna do? Go right back to at least what they know. It's not right, it's not what they wanna do, but it's what they know. So that's one of the ways I feel like it's gonna look like here. And people like you who are interested can just reach out to us, and then we will see what our needs are, what your talents are, and plug you in. I mean, they plugged us in really quickly here. They saw us in medical, and I never saw myself doing this work, but here I am. You know, it just kind of happened, and you just have to have an open heart for it, and it will work out.
And I think to add to that is education. There's a huge education need. Trafficking doesn't happen in Wayne County. It happens in Chicago, Atlanta, big cities. But trafficking happens right here. And I think there is a need for education in the community. So if you're plugged into a civic group, a community group, a church group that needs some education on that, please reach out. We'll be glad to come and do some education on this is what our community looks like. There's a list, and Marielle can speak to this when we come. There's a list of identifying factors of a community. Wayne County meets every single one of them. Military bases, agricultural community, interstate access. It's amazing what is happening right here. So a big need is education that we're finding and doing that. Finding attorneys in town that are willing to link up and help these people, because a lot of times they get charges, prostitution. Well, she's having to prostitute because that's what her trafficker's making her do. And then she gives him the money. So she has charges of prostitution, but then it really is a trafficking case. And so having attorneys that are willing to plug in and help them, because then they're going to get felonies and they're not going to be able to get their jobs, and that can work in those different ways. So helping us connect with the community.
How can you identify someone who's being trafficked?
How can you identify someone who's been trafficked?
So one of the things that you may see is they could be followed by someone. So a lot of the times the pimp or someone who is trafficking them will accompany them to everything. It's like that one person that will not go away, and they're never alone. You will notice that. Commonly it can be a male. And there seems to be tension between the two. There's not like that relaxed, friendly intervention, relationship there. So in the medical field, because I'm a nurse, I do now, looking back, remember people in postpartum after they've had a baby where there's this male figure and a lot of tension in the room, and they're never gone. So that's one way. Another way is they may not know where they are. So you may work at the bank and they're trying to do something, and you say, what's your address? And they will tell you, I don't know. And you will look at them with frustration with, how do you not know where you live? But they are trafficked every 60 days, every 30 days, every year, every 6 months. They literally move them from other states to another state, leave them there for a short period of time, sell them to multiple men. Then they move them. There's a Super Bowl going on. Where's that city? Let's move you there and sell you there because there's a lot of visitors coming there. Let's move you to another highway. So they are so disoriented. That's one way to know that somebody could be trafficked. Signs of abuse, physical, like bruising. You know, a lot of the times they'll lie and they'll tell you, just like a victim of domestic abuse, they'll tell you they fell. But it's that suspicious recurrence of injuries that are unexplainable. That's another way. They cannot produce their paperwork. So, for example, they need something and they have to show a driver's license, but they don't have a driver's license. They don't have a social security card. They don't have a passport or a birth certificate. And that's odd for an adult, but what traffickers do is they will retrieve those papers and will keep them locked up and away from the person. You cannot get anything without those papers. So they cannot run away per se and start a new life without birth certificate, driver's license, et cetera. So when they can't produce things like that, I would say that's a red flag to further look into that. And there are many more that we can go over, but those are one of the main ones. I would say the main focus, though, for you is to look at the people at risk, and those are people who are very vulnerable, low self-esteem, have been abused, are in addiction, are homeless. Homeless youth are one of the highest trafficked population. LGBTQ, a lot of them are kicked out of their homes and are homeless, therefore they're at high risk. And teenagers, the statistics show that the highest age when they start getting trafficked is between 12 and 18. And of course they are at that age very hormonal, very insecure, just such a stressful time that all it takes is someone from the outside to start embellishing or just saying, you're so smart, you're so beautiful, but they feel ugly, or nobody understands me at home, so they become the person that understands them and lures them into trafficking before they even know it. So, yes, sir.
Sorry. I'm sorry, this isn't even my area of expertise on this, but very personal to me. I found out that someone who volunteered at our church, our youth group, was offering kids phones just to be able to be in contact with them, let them know activities that were going on, and maybe it seemed pretty innocuous at the time, but just in the last month, he was arrested for trafficking, and come to find out there was a history of things that were happening that the community wasn't aware of. So when you have people trying to reach out to youth outside of their parents, or trying to provide cell phones for them to be in contact with them in a way that the parents aren't aware of that communication, those are huge warning signs as well, just things to be aware of as a community to keep your own kids safe. So, sorry.
Does Exodus try to get the traffickers? I mean, the bad guys? I mean, or are you just mainly focused on getting the victims out?
I would say if the victims want to press charges, then we do try to collaborate with lawyers who are willing to take their case and form or give complaints, go the legal route to get these traffickers. But as far as the team going after one, that would be a no. We mainly focus on the survivor and sustaining him or her, because men are trafficked as well, so that they can have a meaningful life and heal from the trauma and the abuse.
But yes, we collaborate with law enforcement to help them be able to identify.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Well, if you have any questions afterwards, we're going to hang around. Thank you so much for your time and for coming and listening to us.